Ever had someone who just wouldn't take no for an answer? Well, buckle up, because this story isn't just about a driveway dispute. It's about how one entitled neighbor learned an expensive lesson 3 times. And trust me, the third time was definitely not the charm for her. Before we dive into this wild ride, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Now let's get into it. Living on Maple Street had always been my idea of suburban perfection. You know, those neighborhoods where kids ride their bikes after school and people actually wave to each other during their morning jogs? That was us. My little blue house with its pristine driveway wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. And I'd worked hard for every brick and blade of grass. That morning started like any other Tuesday in October. The leaves were just starting to turn that perfect shade of amber, and there was this crisp feeling in the air that made everything feel fresh and new. I was working from home as usual, sipping my coffee and responding to emails when I heard the familiar rumble of a car engine outside my window. Now let me paint you a picture of my driveway. It's not particularly long, but it's wide enough for 2 cars, and I keep it meticulously clean. My red Subaru usually sits on the left side, leaving the right side empty, a space I use when friends come over or when I need to bring in groceries. It's not a complicated setup, and there's absolutely no way anyone could mistake it for public parking. I didn't think much of the engine sound at first. Living in Pine Grove neighborhood meant getting used to the rhythm of daily life. School, buses in the morning, delivery trucks in the afternoon, the occasional lost driver turning around in someone's driveway. But something about this particular engine sound made me look up from my laptop. Through my home office window, I watched as a shiny white Mercedes SUV, probably worth more than my annual salary, pulled into my driveway as if it owned the place. The car moved with this entitled confidence that made my coffee taste suddenly bitter in my mouth. At first, I thought maybe they were just turning around. We all do it sometimes, right? But no, this car wasn't just making a quick turn. The driver cut the engine. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic making a little too much noise against my desk as my confusion turned to disbelief. Who parks in someone's private driveway without even asking? I watched as a woman stepped out of the Mercedes, designer handbag swinging from her arm, sunglasses perched on her perfectly styled blonde hair. She didn't even glance at my house as she clicked her key fob, the Mercedes chirping its goodbye like it was settling in for a long stay. The woman, who I'd later come to know as Linda Baker, strode toward the local coffee bean cafe down the street with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in their life. I sat there for a moment, my fingers hovering over my keyboard, my morning productivity completely derailed by this surreal situation. My neighbor Mark was out walking his dog, and I saw him do a double take at the Mercedes in my driveway. He caught my eye through the window and gave me this, "Is everything okay?" look. I shook my head slightly, already feeling that this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. I decided to give it 15 minutes. Maybe she was just running in for a quick coffee. Maybe she didn't realize this was a private driveway. Maybe she was having an emergency and needed to make a quick stop. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting to the clock on my computer screen, watching as 15 minutes turned into 30, then 45. The audacity of it all started to sink in. This wasn't a mistake or a quick stop. This was someone who had decided that my driveway was their personal parking spot. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach, not from anger, but from that uncomfortable realization that I was about to have to confront someone who clearly had no regard for basic property boundaries. I picked up my phone, hesitating for a moment. Should I call the police, a towing company, leave a note? The situation seemed both ridiculous and somehow significant at the same time. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of what would become a 3-act drama starring my driveway as the stage and a Mercedes SUV as the unwanted leading character. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, because this is just the beginning of how I ended up having to get this entitled neighbor's car towed, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. And let me tell you, the 3rd time, that's when things got really interesting. I finally mustered up the courage to confront this situation head on. Grabbing my keys and phone, I stepped outside into the crisp October air. The white Mercedes gleamed in my driveway like a monument to entitlement, taking up space that clearly belonged to my property. As I approached the vehicle, I noticed something that made my blood boil even more. A small scrape of red paint on my pristine concrete driveway where the SUV had carelessly turned in. Walking toward the local coffee bean, I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. The cafe's bell chimed as I pushed open the door, the warm aroma of coffee and pastries doing nothing to calm my nerves. It didn't take long to spot her. Linda Baker was holding court at a corner table, surrounded by 3 other women who looked like they'd just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Their laughter echoed through the cafe, drawing attention from other customers trying to enjoy their morning beverages in peace. I approached their table, trying to maintain my composure. Linda's perfectly manicured hand was wrapped around an elaborate iced coffee drink. Her red lips curved in a smile as she regaled her friends with what seemed to be an amusing story. As I got closer, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Something about someone's newly renovated kitchen and how the contractor had completely ruined the imported Italian marble. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Are you the owner of the white Mercedes parked in my driveway?" Linda turned toward me slowly, her designer sunglasses now perched atop her head. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, taking in my work-from-home attire with an expression that made me feel like I'd shown up to a black tie event in pajamas. "Oh, is that your driveway?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. "I'll only be a few minutes. The parking here is absolutely atrocious." Her friends exchanged knowing looks, and I could feel my face growing warm. "I'm sorry, but you can't park there. It's private property, and you didn't ask permission." I tried to keep my voice level, professional. Linda let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Darling, I've been coming to this cafe for years. Nobody has ever had a problem with me parking there before." She waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing away an annoying insect. "Besides, you're not using that side of the driveway anyway. I saw your little red car has plenty of space." The audacity of her response left me momentarily speechless. I glanced around the cafe, noting that several other customers were now watching our interaction with poorly concealed interest. Rachel Chen, my friend who worked as a barista, caught my eye from behind the counter, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Actually," I found my voice again, "I do have a problem with it. I need you to move your car now, or I'll have to call a towing company." The words came out firmer than I'd intended, but something about Linda's attitude had stripped away my usual tendency to avoid confrontation. Linda's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched higher. "Are you threatening me?" She set down her drink with exaggerated care. "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Tom Parker? He's on the city council." Her friends nodded in unison, like a well-rehearsed Greek chorus. I felt a flicker of uncertainty. Was she telling the truth about her husband? But then I remembered the red scrape on my driveway, and my resolve strengthened. "I don't care if your husband is the president," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. "That's my private property, and you're trespassing." The atmosphere in the cafe had grown thick with tension. Linda's friends were now openly staring at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and amusement, as if they couldn't believe someone would dare to challenge their queen bee. At a nearby table, an elderly gentleman had stopped mid-bite of his scone to watch the drama unfold. Linda stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made me wince. She was taller than me in her designer heels, and she used every inch to her advantage as she looked down her nose at me. "Listen here," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I don't appreciate your tone. I'm a paying customer at this establishment, and I've been parking in that spot long before you probably even moved to this neighborhood." "That's not possible," I countered, "because I've owned that house for 5 years, and I've never seen you park there before." Today, a flash of something, anger, embarrassment, crossed Linda's face before she composed herself. "Well, clearly you don't pay very good attention then. I park there all the time when I meet my friends for coffee. It's practically a public space at this point."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Rachel had moved closer to our table, pretending to wipe down nearby surfaces while keeping an eye on the situation. I could see her hand hovering near the phone, ready to call for help if needed. But I wasn't about to back down. "There's nothing public about my private driveway," I stated firmly. "You have exactly 5 minutes to move your car, or I'm calling city towing services. Your choice." Linda's perfectly lined lips pressed into a thin line. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled out my phone and held it up, showing her the towing company's number already pulled up on my screen. "Try me." For a moment, we stood there in a silent standoff. The cafe had gone quiet, except for the gentle hum of the espresso machines and the muted whispers of other customers. Linda's friends were now gathering their belongings, clearly sensing that their pleasant morning coffee clatch was about to come to an abrupt end. Finally, Linda grabbed her designer bag with enough force to make the table shake. "This is ridiculous," she announced to no one in particular. "I can't believe the kind of people they're letting move into this neighborhood. These days," she turned to her friends, "ladies, we'll finish our discussion at my house. At least there I don't have to deal with such, provincial attitudes." As they filed past me, each of Linda's friends gave me a look that could have frozen hell itself. But I stood my ground, watching as Linda stormed out of the cafe, her heels clicking against the floor like angry exclamation points. Through the cafe window, I watched as she approached her Mercedes, fumbling with her keys in her anger. The car's engine roared to life with unnecessary force, and she backed out of my driveway so quickly that her tires left faint marks on the concrete. As the white Mercedes disappeared down Maple Street, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to release. Rachel approached me with a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house," she insisted, and a sympathetic smile. "That was intense," she said, keeping her voice low. "But you handled it well, though something tells me this isn't over." I took a sip of the coffee, grateful for the warmth and the caffeine. "You think she'll be back?" Rachel glanced out the window toward my now empty driveway. "People like that, they always come back. They think the rules don't apply to them." I sighed, already dreading the possibility of another confrontation. "Well, if she does come back, at least I know who to call." I patted my phone, the towing company's number still displayed on the screen. As I walked back to my house, I noticed Mark was still out in his yard, now pretending to trim his hedges while obviously waiting to hear what had happened. I gave him a quick rundown of the confrontation, and he shook his head in disbelief. "You know," he said, leaning on his hedge trimmers, "I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone quite like her. Watch yourself, Emma. People like that can make life difficult when they don't get their way." I nodded, appreciating his concern, but feeling strangely energized by the confrontation. Maybe it was the adrenaline still coursing through my system, or maybe it was the satisfaction of standing up for myself, but I felt ready for whatever Linda Baker might throw my way. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Linda Baker wasn't done with my driveway, and I wasn't done teaching her about respect for other people's property. The next time she decided to park in my driveway, I wouldn't be so nice about it. And as it turned out, I would get plenty of opportunities to make good on that promise. 2 days passed after my confrontation with Linda at the local Coffee Bean, and I'd almost convinced myself that the whole incident was behind me. Almost. The morning was unusually quiet on Maple Street, a blanket of fog softening the edges of everything, making the world feel smaller and more intimate. I was in my kitchen, preparing for a virtual meeting with my team, when I heard the now familiar purr of a luxury engine. Through my kitchen window, I watched in utter disbelief as the white Mercedes SUV glided into my driveway once again. This time, Linda wasn't alone. Another woman sat in the passenger seat, someone I hadn't seen at the cafe before. They were both laughing about something, and I could see Linda gesturing animatedly as she parked, deliberately, precisely, in the exact same spot as before. Time seemed to slow down as I processed what was happening. My coffee cup hovered, halfway to my mouth, steam rising in lazy spirals that matched the fog outside. This wasn't a mistake or a coincidence. This was a calculated move, a direct challenge. Linda was testing me, seeing if I would follow through on my threats from our last encounter. I set my cup down and walked to my home office window for a better view. Linda and her companion were now stepping out of the car, both dressed in what looked like expensive workout gear. The friend, I would later learn her name was Sarah Cooper, was nodding enthusiastically as Linda pointed toward the cafe. Neither of them spared a glance at my house, but there was something in Linda's posture, a certain smugness in her stride, that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. My phone buzzed on my desk, a reminder about my upcoming meeting. In 15 minutes, I needed to be professional, focused, and ready to present quarterly projections to my team. Instead, I was standing here, watching an entitled stranger use my property as her personal parking space for the second time in 3 days. The realization hit me like a physical force. This wasn't going to stop on its own. Linda Baker had made a decision about my driveway, and she was going to keep pushing until someone, me, pushed back hard enough to make her stop. My mind raced through the possible scenarios, the various ways this could play out. I could confront her again, but our last interaction had made it clear that verbal warnings meant nothing to her. I could call the police, but would they even respond to something like this? Besides, by the time they arrived, she'd probably be gone, and I'd look like the unreasonable one. The towing company's number was still in my phone. My finger hovered over it as I watched Linda and Sarah disappear into the morning fog, heading toward the cafe. This was different from last time. Last time I'd given her a warning, tried to handle things diplomatically. This time, she'd made a conscious choice to ignore that warning, to flaunt her disregard for my property rights. My neighbor Mark's dog started barking, drawing my attention to where he stood at his mailbox. He was looking at the Mercedes, then at my window, his expression, a mix of concern and curiosity. When he caught my eye, he gave a slight head shake, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing either. I checked my security camera footage, a recent installation that had seemed like overkill when I bought it, but was now proving its worth. The timestamp showed Linda arriving at 8:43 a.m., clear evidence of her trespassing, if I needed it. The camera had even caught her deliberate parking job, the way she'd adjusted her position multiple times to get it just right, proving this was no rushed mistake or emergency situation. Rachel from the cafe texted me, "Your friend with the Mercedes is back. She's holding court again, telling everyone about some charity gala she's organizing. Want me to say something?" I replied quickly, "No, don't get involved. I'll handle it." My meeting notification popped up again. 10 minutes now. I had to make a decision. My hand was trembling slightly as I picked up my phone, but my voice was steady when I dialed City Towing Services. The dispatcher who answered sounded bored until I mentioned the address. Maple Street? She perked up. Wait, is this about a white Mercedes SUV? My heart skipped a beat. Yes, actually. How did you know? Oh, honey. The dispatcher, Jenny, according to her nameplate when she later arrived, let out a knowing laugh. That woman has been causing trouble all over the neighborhood. She tried parking in Dr. Anderson's reserved spot at the medical center last week. And before that, she blocked someone's garage on Oak Avenue for hours. This information washed over me like cold water. Linda wasn't just targeting me, this was a pattern of behavior. She'd been doing this all over the neighborhood, probably for weeks or months, using her husband's supposed position on the city council as a shield against consequences. The thing is, Jenny continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, nobody's been willing to actually have her towed. They all back down when she starts throwing around her husband's name. You sure you want to go through with this? I looked at my driveway again, where the Mercedes sat like a gleaming monument to privilege and entitlement. My meeting was in 5 minutes, but suddenly that seemed less important than taking a stand, not just for me, but for everyone else who'd been intimidated by Linda Baker's behavior. Yes, I said firmly, send the truck and make sure they take pictures for documentation. Jenny's smile was audible in her voice. Will do. Driver should be there in about 20 minutes. You might want to be ready for some fireworks when she comes out and finds her car gone. After hanging up, I quickly emailed my team, explaining that I had an emergency situation to deal with and needed to reschedule our meeting. Then I set up my phone to record video, just in case. The fog was starting to lift, sunlight breaking, threw in patches that made the Mercedes' white paint almost blindingly bright. Through my window, I could see other neighbors starting their days. Sarah Cooper, my other next-door neighbor, not to be confused with Linda's workout friend, was watering her plants and definitely noticing the Mercedes in my driveway. She kept glancing between my house and the cafe, probably wondering if there was going to be another showdown. The tow truck arrived faster than expected, its yellow lights casting rotating patterns across my house's facade. Dave Sullivan, the driver, was a burly man with kind eyes and efficient movements. He'd clearly done this many times before. "You've got all the documentation?" he asked as he started setting up his equipment. These luxury car owners can get pretty litigious. I showed him my security camera footage, the timestamps, and the video I'd taken of Linda deliberately parking and walking away. He nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Now, you might want to step back. This usually draws a crowd." He was right. Within minutes, several neighbors had found reasons to be outside. Mark had moved his dog-walking operation closer to my house. Sarah Cooper had abandoned all pretense of watering her plants and was openly watching. Even Mrs. Peterson, the elderly lady from 3 houses down, had rolled her wheelchair onto her porch for a better view. The actual towing process took less than 5 minutes. Dave was a professional, and he had the Mercedes secured and ready to go with impressive efficiency. Just as he was finishing up, I saw Linda and her friend emerging from the cafe, carrying the green smoothies and engaged in animated conversation. Linda spotted the tow truck first. She stopped so suddenly that her friend walked right into her, sending a splash of green smoothie onto the sidewalk. For a moment, she just stood there, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, but her mouth hanging open in a perfect O of shock. Then she started running, actually running in her expensive workout gear and designer sneakers toward my driveway. But she was too late. Dave was already pulling away, the Mercedes secured firmly on his truck. "Stop!" Linda's voice cut through the morning air like a siren. "That's my car! You can't do this!" But Dave could, and Dave did. The tow truck turned the corner and disappeared, leaving Linda standing in my driveway, her smoothie forgotten in her hand, her face turning an alarming shade of red. I watched through my window as she spun around, searching for someone to blame. Her eyes landed on my house, and I could see the exact moment she realized what had happened. She stormed toward my front door, her workout friend trailing behind, her looking uncomfortable. The pounding on my door was exactly as dramatic as I'd expected. I took a deep breath, checked that my phone was still recording, and opened it. "You," Linda hissed, jabbing a finger toward my face. "You actually had my car towed. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've just caused yourself?" I kept my voice calm and level. "I warned you about parking in my driveway. You chose to do it anyway. The consequences are entirely your responsibility." "Do you know how much that towing fee is going to cost me?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. "Probably less than it would have cost to park in the cafe's designated parking lot," I replied, unable to keep a hint of satisfaction from my voice. Linda's friend tugged at her arm. "Maybe we should just go get your car," she suggested, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. But Linda wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking with rage as she dialed. "I'm calling Tom right now. We'll see how you like dealing with the city council over this." I waited patiently as she made her call, watching. Her face changed from anger to confusion, to something close to fear. She ended the call without saying goodbye, her hand dropping to her side. "Tom's in a meeting," she said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "That's fine," I replied, still recording everything. "The towing company has all the documentation they need. Your car was illegally parked on private property. It's a pretty straightforward situation." Linda stared at me for a long moment, her expensive sunglasses now slightly askew, her smoothie dripping onto my welcome mat. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and tried to gather what remained of her dignity. "This isn't over," she declared. But the threat sounded hollow even, to her own ears. As she and her friend walked away, presumably to call an Uber to the impound lot, I noticed my neighbors slowly dispersing, heading back to their regular morning routines. But there was something different in the way they looked at me now. A mix of respect and amusement that made me stand a little straighter. I cleaned up the spilled smoothie from my welcome mat, rescheduled my meeting, and tried to get back to my normal day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda Baker was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weekend arrived with a blanket of autumn rain, the kind that makes you want to stay indoors with a good book and hot tea. I was doing exactly that when I heard the crunch of tires on wet gravel. Through the rain-streaked window, that now familiar white Mercedes emerged from the grey morning like a ghost, gliding into my driveway with even more confidence than before. My first thought was that Linda must be joking. After paying nearly $300 in towing fees just days ago, surely she wouldn't risk it again. But there she was, stepping out of her car with a large designer umbrella, acting as if the last incident had never happened. This time, she had what looked like a small group of women waiting for her at the end of my driveway, all huddled under their own expensive umbrellas. I watched as Linda joined her friends, gesturing toward my house with a dismissive wave that made my blood boil. Even through the rain-muffled glass, I could hear fragments of their conversation, something about teaching people lessons and establishing precedents. The security camera footage showed a clear view of Linda's smug expression as she parked her Mercedes, deliberately taking up more space than necessary. She had positioned her car at an angle that would make it difficult for me to get my own vehicle out if I needed to leave. This wasn't just parking anymore. This was a statement. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel at the cafe. "Heads up. She's telling everyone that her husband's going to have your driveway rezoned as public parking. Should I be recording this?" Before I could respond, another message came through, this time from Mark. "You seeing this? She's got quite the audience today." I set down my tea and walked to the front door, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. The rain had picked up, drumming against the roof like applause before a performance. Linda and her friends were now making their way toward the cafe, their laughter carrying through the wet air like wind chimes. Officer John Martinez, who had been patrolling our neighborhood since I moved in, slowed his cruiser as he passed my house. He rolled down his window despite the rain, his expression a mix of concern and amusement. "Everything okay here, Ms. Thompson?" he called out. Saw some familiar faces heading to the cafe. I stepped onto my covered porch, hugging my cardigan closer against the damp chill. Just another episode of Linda Baker parks wherever she wants, Officer Martinez. He shook his head, water droplets flying from his hat brim. "You know, we've had 3 complaints about her this week alone. Different locations, same story. You planning to have her towed again?" The question hung in the rain-heavy air. Was I? The first towing had cost Linda money, but it clearly hadn't taught her the lesson I'd hoped. If anything, it had escalated. The situation turned it into some sort of bizarre power struggle that was now playing out in front of the whole neighborhood. "I'm considering my options," I replied carefully. Officer Martinez nodded slowly. "Well, just keep documenting everything, and call if you need anything. Sometimes people like that need to learn the hard way." As his cruiser pulled away, I noticed Sarah Cooper hurrying across her yard toward me, holding a manila envelope over her head as makeshift rain protection. "Emma," she called out, slightly breathless from her dash through the rain, "you need to see this. Linda's been handing these out at her morning yoga class." The envelope contained several photocopied pages, what looked like property maps of our neighborhood, with handwritten notes in the margins. Linda had apparently been researching property lines and local parking ordinances, highlighting sections that she thought supported her right to park wherever she pleased. "She's been telling everyone that your driveway is technically part of an old easement," Sarah explained, wiping rain from her face. "Says her husband's going to bring it up at the next city council meeting." I invited Sarah inside, away from the rain and potentially prying eyes. As we stood in my kitchen, examining Linda's evidence, the absurdity of the situation struck me. This woman was literally creating propaganda about my driveway. "The thing is," Sarah continued, accepting a cup of coffee from me, "I checked with my sister. She works in the city planning office. There's no easement. Linda's making it all up." A knock at my front door interrupted our conversation. Through the decorative glass panels, I could see Dave Sullivan from the towing company, rain dripping from his yellow slicker. "Sorry to bother you," he said when I opened the door, "but I thought you should know Mrs. Baker came by our office yesterday. Tried to have us blacklisted from working in this neighborhood. Said something about her husband and city contracts." I invited Dave in as well, and soon my kitchen had become an impromptu war room. Dave explained how Linda had stormed into their dispatch office, demanding to speak to a manager and threatening to have their towing license revoked. "Thing is," Dave chuckled, shaking rain from his cap, "her husband isn't even on the city council. He works in real estate development, sure, but he's not an elected official. We checked." The revelation hit me like a thunderclap. All this time, Linda had been wielding her husband's supposed political power like a weapon, but it was all a bluff. She was counting on people being too intimidated to verify her claims. Through my kitchen window, I could see Linda's Mercedes still sitting in my driveway, water streaming off its pristine white surface. In the cafe across the street, I knew she was holding court, probably spinning more tales about easements and city council connections. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah asked, her eyes moving from the window to my face. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the towing company's number. "What do you think, Dave? Ready for another pickup?" Dave grinned, already reaching for his keys. I'll have the truck here in 15 minutes, but you might want to prepare yourself. Something tells me she's not going to take this one as quietly as last time." As if on cue, Rachel sent another text. She's actually giving a speech now, something about standing up to neighborhood tyranny. Should I be worried? I texted back, "Not at all, but maybe start recording. This could get interesting." The rain continued to fall as Dave headed out to call in the tow truck. Sarah stayed with me, both of us watching through the window as events unfolded. Within minutes, we could hear the familiar beeping of the tow truck backing up. "You know," Sarah mused, "I've lived next door to you for 3 years, and I've never seen you get into a confrontation with anyone. What is it about this situation that's different?" I thought about it as we watched Dave begin the process of hooking up the Mercedes. I think it's because this isn't just about parking anymore. It's about someone thinking they can bully and lie their way into getting whatever they want. Someone needs to stand up to her. The cafe door burst open, and Linda emerged into the rain, this time without her umbrella. She was running toward my driveway, her expensive workout wear getting soaked, her perfect hair plastered to her face. "Stop! Stop right now!" she screamed, her voice competing with the thunder that had just started rolling across the sky. Dave continued his work, professionally ignoring her approach. I stepped onto my porch, Sarah right behind me, as Linda reached the edge of my property. "You can't do this again." Linda's mascara was running now, black streaks painting her rage in stark relief against her flushed face. "I've already called Tom. He's going to have your house condemned." "Really?" I called back, my voice carrying clearly through the rain. "That's interesting, because I just learned something fascinating about your husband, Linda. Would you like to share with everyone the truth about his position in the city government?" Linda froze, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Behind her, several of her friends had emerged from the cafe, huddling under the awning to watch the scene unfold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally managed, but her voice had lost its edge of certainty. "No." I stepped down from my porch, umbrella in hand. "So you haven't been telling everyone that he's on the city council? That he can have driveways rezoned and houses condemned at will?" The thunder crashed again, closer this time, as if nature itself was providing dramatic emphasis to my words. Linda's friends were whispering among themselves now, and I could see doubt creeping into their expressions. That's not..." Linda stammered, but the fight was draining from her stance. "Your husband is a real estate agent, Linda. A successful one, I'm sure, but he's not an elected official. He has no power to rezone anything. And these documents you've been passing around?" I held up the manila envelope Sarah had brought me. "Pure fiction. There is no easement on my property." The tow truck's hydraulics whined as Dave lifted the Mercedes off my driveway. Linda watched, seemingly paralyzed, as her car was once again secured for transport. "You're making a huge mistake," she tried one last time, but her voice cracked. "On the words." "No, Linda," I replied calmly. "The mistake was yours. Every time you parked here, every lie you told, every threat you made, those were all your mistakes. And now you're going to pay for another towing fee because you couldn't respect a simple property line." As if to punctuate my words, a brilliant flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The rain intensified, and Linda's friends began retreating back into the cafe, leaving her alone in the downpour. "This isn't over," she said, but it sounded more like a plea than a threat. "Actually, Linda, I think it is. But if you'd like to try parking here again, I'm sure Dave would be happy to give you another ride to the impound lot." Dave waved cheerfully from the tow truck's cabin, Linda's Mercedes now securely fastened behind him. With a final beep of his horn, he pulled away, leaving Linda standing in my driveway, rain washing away the last of her mascara and hopefully her delusions of power. As she finally turned and walked away, her designer outfit ruined by the rain, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. It couldn't be easy, having your lies exposed in front of everyone you'd been trying to impress. But that sympathy was tempered by the knowledge that she'd brought this all on herself. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we have to learn more than once. Sarah squeezed my arm supportively as we watched Linda disappear back into the cafe. You know she's going to try again, right? People like that. They don't know how to back down gracefully. I nodded, already thinking about what the third round of this strange battle might bring. I know, but next time, I'll be even more prepared. Inside the cafe, I could see Rachel grinning and giving me a thumbs up. Officer Martinez drove by again, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. And somewhere across town, Linda's Mercedes was being processed into the impound lot for the second time in a week. The rain began to ease, and a patch of blue sky peeked through the clouds. I had a feeling the next confrontation would be the most dramatic yet. But for now, I was content knowing that sometimes standing your ground means getting a little wet. The following Wednesday dawned with an unusual chill in the air, the kind that whispers warnings of winter's approach. I was in the middle of a video call with my team when Rachel's urgent text lit up my phone. She's here, and she brought reinforcements. Through my office window, I watched a small procession of luxury vehicles file into view. The white Mercedes led the parade, followed by a black Range Rover and a silver BMW. Like a well-choreographed dance, they lined up along the street near my driveway, their drivers emerging in a synchronized display of designer athleisure and determined expressions. Linda Baker stepped out of her Mercedes, but this time something was different. Gone was the casual confidence of her previous visits. Instead, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed their next moves. She wasn't here for coffee today. She was here for a confrontation. My laptop chimed with another meeting notification, but I barely heard it. My attention was fixed on the scene unfolding outside. Linda was speaking to her companions, gesturing toward my house with sharp, decisive movements. The woman from the Range Rover, whom I would later learn, was Patricia Montgomery, head of the Pine Grove Homeowners Association, was nodding along, scribbling notes in a leather-bound portfolio. I ended my video call early, apologizing to my team about a neighborhood situation that required immediate attention. As I moved toward my front door, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mark. They're saying something about deed restrictions and community standards. Want me to call Officer Martinez? Before I could respond, my doorbell rang. The sound felt oddly formal, almost comical given the circumstances. Through the frosted glass, I could see three silhouettes waiting on my porch, standing in a triangle. Formation like some sort of suburban task force. I opened the door to find Linda, flanked by Patricia Montgomery, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as James Wilson, their legal counsel. The contrast between their polished appearance and the absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh. "Ms. Thompson," Patricia began, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone used to delivering uncomfortable news. "We're here to discuss some concerns about your recent actions and their impact on our community standards." I leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed. "You mean my insistence that people don't park in my private driveway?" James Wilson cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Thompson, we've reviewed the original neighborhood covenants, and there appears to be some ambiguity regarding easement rights and community access points." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "And does that review include the documents Mrs. Baker has been distributing, the ones with the fabricated easement claims?" Linda's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. Patricia quickly stepped in, her leather portfolio now open. "We're not here to discuss past misunderstandings. We're here to propose a resolution that benefits everyone." I noticed Sarah Cooper had emerged from her house, pretending to check her mail while obviously listening to every word. Across the street, Rachel was standing in the cafe doorway, phone held suspiciously steady in her hand. "I'm listening," I said, though I made no move to invite them inside. Patricia launched into what was clearly a prepared speech about community, harmony, and the importance of flexible, shared spaces. As she talked, I couldn't help but notice how Linda kept shifting her weight from foot to foot, her designer boots creaking slightly with each movement. "Our proposal is simple," Patricia concluded. "We suggest designating your driveway as a flex parking space during cafe business hours, with proper signage and a small monthly stipend to compensate for the usage." James Wilson produced a document from his leather briefcase. "We've drawn up a preliminary agreement. The HOA is prepared to offer you $300 monthly for the arrangement." I stared at them, momentarily speechless. They were actually trying to buy the right to use my driveway as a public parking space. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "Instead of simply parking in the cafe's designated lot or the public spaces available on Maple Street, you want to pay me to turn my private property into a parking lot for Linda and her friends." "It's a very generous offer," Linda interjected, speaking for the first time. "Most people would be grateful for the extra income." I felt a familiar surge of frustration, but it was tempered by an almost overwhelming sense of disbelief. "And what about my right to use my own driveway? What about when I need to leave for work or have guests over?" "The agreement includes provisions for resident priority," James Wilson explained, flipping through his documents. "During designated hours, you would maintain the right to ask vehicles to be moved if necessary." "Ask vehicles to be moved?" I repeated. "You mean like I've been doing? The same requests that have been completely ignored, leading to 2 towing incidents." Patricia's professional smile flickered slightly. "Those unfortunate incidents are precisely why we're trying to find a more amicable solution." From the corner of my eye, I saw Officer Martinez's patrol car slow as it passed my house. He didn't stop, but his presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this increasingly bizarre situation. "I have a counter-proposal," I said, straightening up from my doorframe. "How about everyone simply respects private property rights? No monthly payments, no complicated agreements, just basic courtesy and adherence to existing laws." Linda made a sound that might have been a scoff or a laugh. "You're really going to turn down $300 a month out of spite?" "No, Linda," I replied, keeping my voice level. "I'm turning it down because this isn't about money. This is about respect, boundaries, and the simple fact that you can't buy your way out of following the rules." James Wilson closed his briefcase with a sharp click. "Perhaps we should give Ms. Thompson some time to consider the offer more carefully." "There's nothing to consider," I said firmly. "My driveway is not for sale, rent, or temporary lease. Not for $300, not for $3,000. Now, unless you have something else to discuss, I have work to get back to." Patricia looked like she wanted to say more, but Linda was already turning away, her face a mask of barely contained rage. As they walked back to their vehicles, I could hear them muttering about unreasonable and difficult people. Sarah had given up all pretense of checking her mail and was now openly watching the scene. As the procession of luxury vehicles pulled away, she walked over to my porch, shaking her head in amazement. "Did they really try to buy your driveway?" she asked, climbing the steps to join me. "More like rent it," I replied, still holding the unsigned agreement they'd left with me. "Can you believe this is what it's come to?" Sarah took the document, scanning its contents with growing incredulity. "This is insane. They actually had a lawyer draw this up." Apparently, Linda's influence extends beyond her imaginary city council connections. We both watched as the last car disappeared around the corner. The morning had grown warmer, but there was still a chill in the air that seemed appropriate for the confrontation that had just taken place. "You know what this means, don't you?" Sarah asked, handing the agreement back to me. "That they're not going to stop?" She nodded. Linda's not used to hearing no, and now she's got the HOA involved. This is going to get worse before it gets better. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Got the whole thing on video. Also, Linda's telling everyone you tried to extort money from her. Should I set the record straight?" I typed back a quick response. "Let her talk. The truth has a way of coming out." Inside my house, my laptop was still chiming with meeting notifications, but the workday suddenly felt very far away. I had a feeling that Linda's next move wouldn't involve lawyers or HOA representatives. She had tried playing by the rules, or at least her version of them, and it hadn't worked. I should get security cameras for the back of the house too, I mused, more to myself than to Sarah. You think she'd really try something like that? I thought about the look in Linda's eyes as she'd walked away. The way her carefully maintained composure had cracked just slightly when I refused her offer. I think she's running out of options, and that makes her dangerous. Sarah squeezed my arm supportively. "Well, whatever she tries next, you've got witnesses and evidence." She gestured toward Rachel, who was still standing in the cafe doorway with her phone. As if reading our thoughts, Officer Martinez's patrol car made another pass by my house. This time he did stop, rolling down his window with a knowing smile. "Everything okay here, ladies?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew about the morning's events. "Just another day in paradise," I replied, holding up the unsigned agreement. He shook his head, chuckling. "You know, in all my years on this beat, I've never seen someone go to such lengths to avoid using a perfectly good parking lot. Almost makes you wonder what's really going on here." His words stuck with me long after he'd driven away. What was really driving Linda's obsession with my driveway? Was it really just about convenient parking, or was there something deeper at play? Sarah headed home to start her workday, and I finally returned to my neglected video meetings. But as I sat at my desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that this morning's failed negotiation was just the beginning of a new phase in this strange suburban warfare. Looking out my window at my now empty driveway, I wondered what Linda's next move would be. She had tried intimidation, then lies about her husband's influence, and now an attempt at a legal solution. Each failure seemed to push her closer to some kind of breaking point. My phone buzzed one more time, a message from Dave at the towing company. "Heard about this morning's show. Just wanted you to know we've got your back. Keep that security camera running." I smiled at his message, grateful for the unexpected allies I'd found in this bizarre battle. Whatever Linda was planning next, I would be ready. Sometimes standing your ground means being prepared for anything, even if anything includes formal proposals to rent your driveway from a homeowners association. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but there was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. Linda Baker had shown her hand, revealed the lengths she would go to get her way. Now it was just a matter of waiting to see what she would do when she realized that money and influence couldn't solve every problem. 3 days of unexpected peace had lulled me into a false sense of security. The crisp Friday morning started, normally enough. Birds chirping, neighbors heading to work, the usual rhythm of suburban life in full swing. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the porch, taking advantage of what would likely be one of the last warm days of autumn. A sleek, black Tesla rolled to a stop in front of my house, and out stepped Tom Parker himself, Linda's supposedly all-powerful husband. He was shorter than I'd imagined, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. His presence on my property carried none of his wife's dramatic flair. Instead, he moved with the calculated precision of someone used to closing deals. "Ms. Thompson!" he called out, climbing my porch steps with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "I believe we're overdue for a conversation." I remained seated in my porch chair, deliberately taking another sip of coffee before responding. "Mr. Parker, I was wondering when you'd make an appearance." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside me. "It's my property, but apparently that doesn't mean much to your family." His smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. I apologize for my wife's enthusiasm. Linda can be quite persistent when she sets her mind to something. Is that what we're calling it now? Persistence. Tom Parker settled into the chair, placing his portfolio on the small table between us. "I'll be direct, Ms. Thompson. This situation has gotten out of hand, and I'm here to resolve it." The morning sun caught his platinum wedding band as he opened his portfolio, reminding me that this man had chosen to marry Linda, had presumably seen something beyond the entitled behavior she'd been displaying. "Your wife has been trespassing on my property, spreading lies about your position in local government and attempting to intimidate me," I stated flatly. "What exactly do you think needs resolving?" He pulled out a stack of papers, each one bearing the letterhead of Parker Real Estate Development. "I've been following the situation closely. The failed HOA negotiation, the towing incidents, the community tension it's creating. None of this is good for property values." "Ah," I nodded, understanding dawning. "So that's what this is about, not your wife's behavior, but your real estate interests." Tom had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Everything in this neighborhood affects everything else, Ms. Thompson. Property values, community relations, future development opportunities. It's all connected." A familiar engine sound drew my attention to the street. Linda's white Mercedes was crawling past my house, her face visible behind the wheel, watching her husband's attempt at negotiation. "Your wife is circling my house like a shark," I observed. "Is that part of your resolution strategy?" Tom didn't bother looking at the Mercedes. "Linda is invested in the outcome of this discussion, but I assure you, I'm here to find a reasonable solution." "A solution to what exactly?" "Because from where I'm sitting, the solution is simple. Tell your wife to stop parking in my driveway." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "What if I told you I could make your property worth twice what you paid for it?" I stared at him, momentarily thrown by the abrupt change in direction. "Are you trying to buy my house?" "Not exactly," he smiled, warming to his subject. "I'm offering you an opportunity. My company is planning a significant development project in this area. Small retail spaces, luxury apartments, the kind of thing that could transform this neighborhood." The pieces started falling into place. "And my property factors into this how? Your location is strategic, corner lot, good visibility, existing structure that could be repurposed." He spread several architectural renderings across the table. "We could make you a very generous offer, well above market value." I looked at the drawings, sleek, modern buildings replacing the familiar homes of my neighbors, my own house transformed into what looked like an upscale coffee shop. "Is this why Linda's been so obsessed with parking here, marking territory for your development project?" Tom's expression flickered. "Linda can be overzealous in supporting my business interests, but this offer stands on its own merits." The white Mercedes passed by again, slower this time. Linda's face was a mask of barely contained anticipation. "Let me get this straight," I said, pushing the renderings back toward him. "Sure, your wife has been harassing me, spreading lies about your non-existent political power and trying to force me to let her use my driveway. all as part of some twisted strategy to pressure me into selling. I wouldn't characterize it quite that way, Tom replied smoothly. Think of it as an aggressive market research approach. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Market research? Is that what we're calling harassment these days? Ms. Thompson, his voice took on an edge of impatience. I'm offering you a way to profit from this situation. Significantly profit. I stood up, gathering the remains of my now cold coffee. Mr. Parker, let me be very clear. I'm not selling my house, I'm not leasing my driveway. And if your wife continues her aggressive market research, I'll continue. You have her car towed at her expense. He remained seated, his expression hardening. You might want to reconsider. Development is coming to this neighborhood, whether you participate or not. Property values, traffic patterns, zoning regulations, everything changes. You can either benefit from those changes or what? I challenged. More harassment? More lies? More attempts at intimidation? The Mercedes had parked across the street now, Linda watching our interaction like a hawk. Tom stood slowly, gathering his papers. I'm trying to help you, Ms. Thompson. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Threats don't become more palatable just because they're delivered in an expensive suit. He adjusted his tie, his businessman's facade cracking slightly. This isn't a threat. It's a reality check. Change is coming to Pine Grove, and you're standing in its way. No, I corrected him. I'm standing on my property, which isn't for sale. And you can tell your wife that the next time she parks in my driveway, I won't wait to call the towing company. Tom's response was cut off by the sound of a car door slamming. Linda was storming across the street, her designer heels clicking against the pavement like angry punctuation marks. Did you tell her? She demanded, reaching the bottom of my porch steps. Did you explain what an opportunity this is? Linda. Tom's voice carried a warning tone. I told you to wait in the car. I'm tired of waiting, she snapped. I'm tired of this whole situation. Do you know what people are saying about me? The videos that are circulating, all because she won't be reasonable. I watched this marital discord unfold on my porch with a sort of detached fascination. Reasonable? Like parking in someone's driveway and lying about your husband's position in local government? Linda's face flushed. I was trying to help. This neighborhood needs upgrading, needs people who understand progress and development. But you're too stubborn to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture being your husband's development project, the one you've been doing market research for by harassing your neighbors. Tom placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. This isn't helping, Linda. She shook him off. No, what's not helping is you being so passive about all this. A few weeks of inconvenience, and she's acting like I've committed some terrible crime. Trespassing is actually a crime, I pointed out mildly. So is harassment. Linda's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? No, just another reality check, since those seem to be going around this morning. Tom stepped between us, his salesman's smile back in place. I think we should continue this discussion another time when everyone's had a chance to cool down and consider their options. There's nothing to consider, I stated firmly. My property isn't for sale, and it's not a parking lot. Those are the only options on the table. He nodded tightly, guiding his protesting wife down the porch steps. As they walked back to their respective vehicles, I heard Linda's voice carrying on the morning air. This isn't over. She can't stop progress. I watched them drive away, the Tesla and the Mercedes, symbols of the success and power they wielded so carelessly. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just saw the Parkers leaving. You okay? Fine, I typed. Back. Just got an education in real estate development and creative harassment techniques. Officer Martinez's patrol car rolled past, and he gave me a questioning look. I waved to indicate everything was fine, but I could see him slowing down to watch the Parkers' vehicles disappear around the corner. Looking at my driveway, the simple concrete strip that had somehow become ground zero in this suburban warfare, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. What had started as a simple parking dispute had evolved into a full-blown property development drama, complete with hostile takeover attempts and family dynamics I hadn't asked to be part of. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Rachel. "Linda's back at the cafe, telling everyone you tried to extort money from her husband now. Want me to share the porch video?" "Not yet," I replied. "Let's save that for when we really need it." Setting my empty coffee cup in the kitchen, I glanced at the security camera feed. The morning had returned to its usual quiet. But something told me this peace wouldn't last. Tom and Linda Parker had shown their hand, revealed the true motivation behind their strange campaign of harassment. Now, it was just a matter of waiting to see what they'd try next. Something told me that Linda's next parking attempt wouldn't be about coffee or convenience. It would be a deliberate act of defiance, a statement about power and progress, and who got to define those terms in our little corner of the world. Well, let them try. Sometimes the best defense against progress is simply standing your ground, one parking space at a time. The weekend brought unexpected rain and even more unexpected visitors. I was sorting through my mail when the sound of multiple engines caught my attention. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched a procession of vehicles I'd never seen before pull up along my street. Not the usual luxury cars that accompanied Linda's entourage, but work trucks, contractors' vehicles with ladders strapped to their roofs and company logos on their sides. My security camera pinged with movement alerts as men in hard hats began unloading equipment. They moved with purpose, setting up what looked like surveying tools despite the drizzling rain. At the center of this activity stood Tom Parker, now dressed in khakis and a waterproof jacket, directing the operation like a conductor before his orchestra. I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug in hand, as the first measuring tape stretched across my front lawn. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying over the sound of idling engines. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Tom turned, offering that same practiced smile I'd come to distrust. "Ms. Thompson, just conducting some preliminary surveys, standard procedure for the neighborhood development plan." "On my private property? Without permission?" "The city approved our request for an environmental and structural survey of the area," he replied smoothly, producing a document from his jacket pocket. "All perfectly legal, I assure you." Before I could respond, a familiar white Mercedes pulled up, and Linda emerged, practically bouncing with excitement. She was carrying what looked like blueprints, her designer rain boots splashing through puddles as she hurried to join her husband. "Oh good, you're home," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can see the future of Pine Grove firsthand." I was about to tell them exactly what they could do with their future plans when movement across the street caught my eye. Through the cafe window, I could see Rachel frantically waving to get my attention. She held up her phone, then pointed down the street. Following her gesture, I spotted Officer Martinez's patrol car parked discreetly at the corner. He wasn't alone. Next to him stood a woman in a city official's windbreaker, taking notes as they observed the scene unfolding in front of my house. Tom was still talking, something about property lines and development zones, when a new voice cut through the rain. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The woman from the corner had approached, her city ID badge glinting in the gray light. "I'm Catherine Martinez, no relation to our fine officer here, from the city planning commission. Would you mind explaining what's happening on this property?" Tom's smile didn't waver, but I noticed his shoulders tense slightly. "Of course, we're conducting preliminary surveys for the Pine Grove Development Project. All the paperwork was approved last week." Catherine consulted her tablet, protected from the rain by a clear cover. That's interesting, because according to our records, the only survey permits issued for this area are for the commercial zone 2 blocks over. There's no approval for residential property assessment. Linda's excitement visibly deflated. There must be some mistake. Tom, show her. The paperwork. Tom produced his document again, but Catherine barely glanced at it. Mr. Parker, that's an application for permit consideration, not an approval. The date stamp clearly shows it's still under review. The contractors had stopped their work, looking uncertainly between Tom and their partially set-up equipment. One of them, a younger man with honest eyes, approached me quietly. "Ma'am, we were told this was all authorized. If it's not..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Pack it up," I told him kindly, "and maybe in the future, verify permits directly with the city before starting work." Officer Martinez had joined us now, his presence adding weight to Catherine's words. "Mr. Parker, you're aware that conducting unauthorized surveys on private property could be considered trespassing." "This is ridiculous," Linda interjected, her voice rising with familiar hysteria. "We're trying to improve this neighborhood, bring it into the 21st century, and all we get is bureaucratic roadblocks and uncooperative residents." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Parker, proper urban development requires following established procedures and respecting property rights. It's not about who can push their agenda through the fastest." The rain was falling harder now, turning the survey flags planted in my lawn into drooping markers of failed ambition. The contractors were efficiently packing up their equipment, clearly wanting no part of this confrontation. "Tom," Linda hissed, tugging at her husband's sleeve, "do something, call Richard." Tom's composed facade cracked slightly. "Richard's not going to help with this, Linda. He warned me about jumping the gun on the permits." I watched this exchange with growing interest. Richard wouldn't be Richard Chen from the city council, would he? Rachel's uncle. Linda's head snapped toward me, her eyes widening in recognition. All those hours she'd spent at the cafe, complaining about me to Rachel, and she'd never made the connection. "That's right," Rachel called from the cafe doorway, where she'd come to watch the scene unfold. "Uncle Richard's been very interested in all the stories about unauthorized parking and harassment in the neighborhood, particularly since they involved a certain real estate developer trying to pressure residents into selling." Tom's professional demeanor finally crumbled. "Linda, get in the car." "But the survey is over," he cut her off. "We're done here." Catherine was making notes on her tablet. "Mr. Parker, expect a formal notice from the City Planning Commission about this incident, and I'd strongly advise against any further unauthorized activities in this neighborhood." The contractors' trucks started pulling away one by one, their equipment unused, their presence a testament to Tom Parker's overconfidence. Officer Martinez stayed until the last vehicle had gone, ensuring there would be no further attempts to survey my property. Linda remained rooted to the spot, her designer rain boots sinking slightly into my lawn. "This isn't fair," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We had a plan, a vision." "Vision doesn't override the law, Mrs. Parker," Catherine stated firmly, "or property rights." The rain had plastered Linda's carefully styled hair to her face, making her look suddenly vulnerable. For the first time since this whole saga began, I saw something other than entitlement in her expression: fear. "Tom!" she called out to her husband, who was already retreating to his Tesla. "Where are you going?" "Home, Linda, to salvage what I can of this project before Richard Chen brings the full weight of the city council down on us." The mighty Linda Baker Parker stood alone on my lawn, her blueprints wilting in the rain, her grand plans for neighborhood transformation crumbling like sandcastles in a storm. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Your boots are sinking into my lawn," I pointed out. "You might want to move before you need a tow truck for yourself instead of your car." She looked down at her feet, then back at me, a strange mix of emotions crossing her face. Without a word, she turned and walked back to her Mercedes. As she drove away, I noticed her perfect posture had slumped slightly, as if the weight of her failed schemes was physically pressing down on her. Rachel jogged across the street under an umbrella, grinning broadly. "So," she said, joining me on my porch, "that was interesting. You knew about this? About your uncle?" She shrugged. "I may have mentioned the situation to him last week. He's been trying to clean up the city's development approval process, and the Parkers have been on his radar for a while. Today just provided some concrete evidence of their methods." Catherine approached us, tucking her tablet into her waterproof bag. "Ms. Thompson, you might want to consider filing a formal complaint about this incident. The city takes unauthorized surveys very seriously. It's often a precursor to aggressive development tactics." I nodded, thinking about all the photos and videos I'd collected over the past weeks. "I have plenty of documentation." Officer Martinez joined our impromptu porch gathering. "I have a feeling the Parkers won't be causing any more trouble in this neighborhood. Amazing how quickly people change their behavior when they realize they're not the ones holding all the cards." The rain began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds in patches. My lawn was dotted with small holes where the survey stakes had been, but those would heal. What mattered was that the message had been sent. Some things weren't for sale, no matter how grand the vision or how expensive the offer. Sarah texted me from her window. "Best show on the street. Should we celebrate with coffee?" My treat. As we walked toward the cafe, Rachel, Sarah, and I couldn't help but look back at my driveway. It was just concrete and gravel, nothing special or luxurious. But it was mine, and I had defended it not just from Linda's entitled parking habits, but from her husband's ambitious development plans. Sometimes the smallest battles become symbols of something larger. In this case, the right to hold on to your piece of the world, no matter who wants to remake it in their image. Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from her uncle. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at the next city council meeting," she told me, "about development pressures on residential neighborhoods." I smiled, thinking about Linda's face when she realized her coffee shop complaints had been reaching a city council member's ears all along. "Tell him I'll think about it." The cafe was warm and inviting after the rain, and as we settled into a corner table, I noticed Linda's usual spot was empty. Somehow I doubted she'd be coming back for her morning coffee anytime soon. "You know," Sarah mused, stirring her latte, "I bet the Parkers never expected their big development plan to be derailed by a parking dispute." "Sometimes the smallest act of standing your ground can have unexpected consequences," I replied, watching the rain wash away the last traces of survey marks from my lawn. The day settled back into its normal rhythm, but something had fundamentally changed in our little corner of Pine Grove. The next time I saw Linda's white Mercedes, it was turning down a different street, avoiding my house entirely. Sometimes victory comes not with a bang, but with the quiet understanding that some battles are worth fighting, even if they start with something as simple as a parking space. Tuesday morning arrived with an eerie silence. The usual bustle of Pine Grove's morning routine felt muted, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I was working on my laptop when the first signs of trouble appeared, not with a bang, but with the mechanical whine of construction equipment. Through my office window, I watched a massive dumpster being lowered onto the Parkers' driveway, 3 houses down. Within minutes, a team of workers in matching uniforms began streaming out of Linda's pristine colonial home, carrying what looked like high-end furniture and designer fixtures. My phone lit up with a message from Rachel. You need to see this. Linda's having a complete meltdown at the cafe. She's selling everything and telling anyone who'll listen that it's your fault. I stepped onto my porch, just as Patricia Montgomery from the HOA hurried past, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Emma," she called out, slightly breathless, "have you heard? The Parkers are divorcing. Tom's development company is under investigation and Linda's not taking it well." Before I could process this information, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the direction of the cafe. Without thinking, I jogged across the street, Patricia close behind. The scene that greeted us through the cafe window was pure chaos. Linda Baker Parker stood in the center of the cafe, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee. Her designer outfit, usually so pristine, was stained and wrinkled. Gone was the carefully maintained facade of suburban superiority, replaced by something raw and desperate. "This is what happens," she was shouting to the stunned morning crowd, "when people refuse to embrace progress, when they cling to their little pieces of concrete and won't see the bigger picture." Rachel stood behind the counter, phone discreetly recording everything. The other customers had pushed their chairs back, creating a circle of space around. Linda's unfolding breakdown. Officer Martinez was already there, attempting to calm the situation. "Mrs. Parker," he began, his voice steady and professional, "I'm going to need you to step outside." Linda spun toward him, her eyes wild. "Do you know what I've lost? Everything. My reputation, my marriage, my standing in this community, all because of one stubborn woman and her precious driveway." That's when she spotted me in the doorway. The cafe fell silent as our eyes met across the debris of her outburst. For a moment I thought she might throw something at me, but instead she laughed, a high, brittle sound that made several customers flinch. "Well, if it isn't the neighborhood. Hero," she sneered. "Come to witness your handiwork? Congratulations, you've managed to destroy years of careful planning. Are you happy now?" I kept my voice level, aware of the phones recording this encounter. "Linda, this isn't about my driveway or your development plans anymore. You need help." "Help?" she scoffed. "I needed help weeks ago. Help understanding how someone like you could have so much power. Do you know what Tom said when he left? He said I'd ruined everything with my obsessive behavior. Me, I was trying to help him, to help this whole neighborhood." Officer Martinez took a step closer to her. "Mrs. Parker, this isn't helping. Your situation." "My situation?" Linda gestured wildly at the cafe around her. "My situation is that I'm being forced to sell my house because my husband's company is under investigation. My situation is that my friends won't return my calls because they're afraid of being associated with the scandal. My situation is that I've become a laughingstock in the very community I was trying to improve." Sarah Cooper had arrived, drawn by the commotion. She surveyed the scene with wide eyes before pulling out her phone to text someone, probably her sister in the city. "Planning office." Linda wasn't finished. Her voice rose as she continued her tirade. "You think you've won something? Protected your precious little piece of suburbia? Well, congratulations. You've managed to stop progress. Hope you're all happy in your mediocre little houses with your mediocre little lives." "That's enough," Officer Martinez said firmly. "Mrs. Parker, you're causing a disturbance. If you don't calm down, I'll have no choice but to..." "To what?" Linda challenged. "Arrest me. Go ahead. Add it to the list of things I've lost because of this. This parking space vigilante." Catherine Martinez from the City Planning Commission chose that moment to walk in, taking in the scene with professional detachment. "Mrs. Parker, I have some paperwork you need to sign regarding the unauthorized survey incident." Linda's face crumpled. "More paperwork? More regulations? More rules designed to keep people like me from improving things?" "No," Catherine replied calmly. "Just standard documentation of your husband's violation of city ordinances. Unless you'd prefer we handle this through your lawyers. The fight seemed to drain out of Linda all at once. She sank into the nearest chair, heedless of the coffee stains on her designer skirt. "You don't understand," she said, her voice suddenly small. "This neighborhood was supposed to be our legacy. The Parker Plaza development was going to put us on the map, but now you're facing the consequences of trying to bulldoze your way through other people's rights," Catherine finished for her. Rachel began cleaning up the broken cups, the sound of ceramic scraping against tile, the only noise in the otherwise silent cafe. Linda watched her with vacant eyes, as if seeing the destruction she'd caused for the first time. "I'll pay for the damages," she said quietly. "Yes, you will," Rachel agreed. "And then I think it's best if you find somewhere else to get your morning coffee." Linda's hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace like a lifeline. "You're banning me after all the money I've spent here?" "No," Rachel replied evenly. "I'm suggesting you take some time to reflect on your choices and their impact on others. There are plenty of other coffee shops in town." The sound of heavy furniture being loaded into the dumpster drifted in through the cafe's open door. Linda winced at each crash, as if each piece of her carefully curated life was physically painful to let go. "Your workers are being rather rough with your furniture," Patricia observed, unable to keep the judgment from her voice. "They're not my workers," Linda admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're from the auction house. Tom's lawyers suggested we liquidate assets before everything gets tied up in the investigation." The reality of Linda's situation hit me then. This wasn't just about a parking dispute anymore, or even about failed development plans. This was about watching someone's carefully constructed world fall apart, piece by piece. Officer Martinez cleared his throat. "Mrs. Parker, I'm still going to need you to file a statement about this incident." Linda stood slowly, straightening her stained clothing with trembling hands. Of course, more paperwork, more documentation of my failures. As she followed him toward the door, she paused next to me. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "I don't even remember why it was so important to park in your driveway. It just became this thing, this battle I couldn't lose." "But you did lose," I replied gently, "and it cost you everything." She nodded, a single tear tracking down her perfectly made-up face. "Be careful what you fight for, Ms. Thompson. Sometimes winning feels an awful lot like losing." With that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving behind the debris of her breakdown and a room full of stunned observers. Rachel resumed cleaning, and gradually the other customers returned to their morning routines. Catherine approached me, her tablet tucked under her arm. "Well, that was dramatic." "Is it true?" I asked. "About Tom's company being under investigation?" She nodded. Richard Chen's audit turned up some interesting patterns of permit violations and attempted resident intimidation. The Parkers' development plans were just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah joined us, showing me her phone. On the screen was a real estate listing for the Parkers' house, a motivated seller situation with a significantly reduced asking price. "End of an era," she mused, "though I can't say I'll miss the drama." I watched through the window as Linda climbed into her white Mercedes, probably one of the last times she'd be able to afford such a luxury. Officer Martinez followed in his patrol car, ensuring she made it to the station to file her statement. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the cafe floor. Rachel brought us fresh coffee, refusing to let us pay. "On the house," she insisted. "Consider it a thank you for giving me the most interesting footage my TikTok has ever seen." "You're not really going to post that, are you?" I asked, surprised. Rachel shrugged. "Already did. Don't worry, I blurred the faces, but people need to see what happens when entitlement meets reality." As we sipped our coffee, watching the auction workers continue to empty the Parker house, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, in seeing justice served, but there was also a tinge of sadness for a woman who had lost everything because she couldn't admit she was wrong. "You know," Sarah said thoughtfully, "in all the times Linda parked in your driveway, she could have just walked the extra 50 feet from the cafe's parking lot." "Sometimes," Catherine observed, "the shortest distance between 2 points isn't worth the cost of taking it." The rest of the morning passed quietly. The dumpster filled up with the remnants of Linda's perfect life, and her Mercedes eventually returned from the police station, pulling into her soon-to-be former driveway one last time. The calm after Linda's cafe meltdown lasted exactly 3 days. The autumn air had turned sharp with the promise of winter when I received an urgent text from Mark at 6 in the morning. "You need to see this. Now." Looking through my bedroom window, I initially couldn't process what I was seeing. The white Mercedes was back in my driveway, but this time it wasn't alone. 3 other luxury vehicles had arranged themselves in a perfect row behind it, effectively turning my entire driveway into an impromptu parking lot. Linda stood in my front yard, directing yet another car into position with the authority of a battlefield commander. She wore workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills, but her usual polished appearance had a frayed edge to it. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her movements tense and jerky. "Perfect!" she called out to the driver of a black Range Rover. "Now they'll see! Everyone will see!" I threw on a jacket and grabbed my phone, already dialing Officer Martinez's number. Before I could hit call, another text came through, this time from Rachel. "Don't react. That's what she wants. Uncle Richard is already handling it." But watching Linda organize her luxury car rebellion in my driveway, I knew this had moved beyond waiting for official intervention. She had crossed a line, and this time, the response needed to be decisive. As I opened my front door, Linda spun to face me, a manic smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, neighbor. Having a little breakfast gathering with my friends. Hope you don't mind us using your lovely parking area." The other drivers, women I recognized from her usual coffee group, looked far less comfortable with the situation. They stood in a tight cluster near the cafe, shooting nervous glances between Linda and me. "Linda," I kept my voice steady, "you need to move these cars immediately." She laughed, the sound brittle in the morning air. "Or what? You'll have us all towed? Go ahead. I've already called every news station in the area. Let them see how this neighborhood treats its residents. Let them see what progress looks like when it's being strangled by small-minded people." One of her friends, a woman in expensive yoga wear, stepped forward hesitantly. "Linda, maybe this isn't the best way to—" "Quiet, Patricia," Linda snapped. "You said you supported me. You all did. Well, this is what support looks like. This is how we take a stand." I noticed movement at the cafe. Rachel was setting up her phone on a tripod in the window, while Sarah Cooper had positioned herself on her porch with a camera. They were documenting everything, creating an undeniable record of Linda's latest escalation. Officer Martinez's patrol car turned onto our street, followed by a familiar city vehicle. Catherine from the Planning Commission stepped out, tablet in hand, her expression grim. "Mrs. Parker," Catherine called out, her voice carrying across my lawn, "this is a direct violation of the restraining order issued yesterday." Linda's smile faltered for just a moment. "Restraining order? I never received any." "It was delivered to your lawyer last night," Catherine interrupted, holding up her tablet, "along with the preliminary findings of our investigation into your husband's business practices. You are legally prohibited from coming within 50 feet of this property." The color drained from Linda's face, but she stood her ground. "This is harassment." I'm exercising my right to peaceful protest against oppressive property restrictions. Officer Martinez approached slowly, his hand resting casually on his belt. Ma'am, you need to disperse this gathering and move these vehicles immediately. Or what? Linda challenged, though her voice had lost some of its conviction. You'll arrest me in front of all these cameras. Go ahead. Show everyone how this neighborhood treats people who try to improve it. Her friends were already backing away, sensing the shift in atmosphere. One by one, they hurried to their cars, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Linda! One called out through her car window. We can't afford to get involved in this. I'm sorry. The sound of engines starting filled the morning air as Linda's support group abandoned her impromptu protest. She watched them go, her expression shifting from confidence to betrayal to something close to despair. Some friends you are. She shouted after them. This is why this neighborhood will never change, because people are too afraid to take a stand. I noticed Dave from the towing company had arrived, his truck idling quietly at the corner. He caught my eye and gave a slight nod, waiting for the signal. Linda, I said softly, taking a step toward her. It's over. The development project, the parking crusade, all of it. You need to stop before you make things worse for yourself. She turned to me, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in her eyes, something almost human. Then it vanished, replaced by a hardness that was almost frightening. Worse, she laughed. How could it get worse? My husband's leaving me, my assets are frozen, my reputation is ruined, and all because you couldn't share a simple parking space. No, Catherine interjected firmly. All because you and your husband tried to bully and manipulate your way through this neighborhood. The parking disputes were just a symptom of a much bigger problem. Linda's Mercedes now stood alone, in my driveway, a solitary monument to her crumbling world. She clutched her key fob like a weapon, pressing the lock button repeatedly until the car's beeping echoed through the morning air. You want to tow my car? She challenged, her voice rising hysterically. Fine, take it. Take everything. That seems to be what this neighborhood does best. Takes and takes until there's nothing left. Officer Martinez stepped closer, his hand still on his belt. Mrs. Parker, this is your final warning. Move your vehicle and leave the premises, or I will have no choice but to place you under arrest. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across my driveway. Linda stood in the middle of it all, a solitary figure fighting a battle she'd already lost. Do you know what it's like? She asked suddenly, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. To watch everything you've built just crumble? To become the neighborhood joke after years of being the one everyone looked up to? For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant rumble of Dave's tow truck waiting patiently for its cue. Linda, I said gently, you did this to yourself. Every step of the way, you chose confrontation over conversation, intimidation over respect. The parking space was just the beginning, a symptom of something much deeper. She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly reached into her designer workout jacket. Everyone tensed, but she pulled out only her car keys. You know what? The funny thing is, she said, turning the keys over in her hand, I don't even remember why it was so important to park here. It became this symbol, this line in the sand, and once I'd drawn it, I couldn't back down. With a sudden movement, she flung her keys at my feet. They landed with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo in the tense silence. There, she announced, her voice cracking. Now you have everything. The keys to my car, my dignity, my whole life. It's all yours. I hope you're happy. Before anyone could respond, she turned and started walking, not toward the cafe or her house, but down the street, her designer sneakers slapping against the pavement with each determined step. Officer Martinez picked up the keys while Catherine spoke quietly into her phone. Dave's tow truck rumbled to life, preparing for one final pickup. "Should we go after her?" Sarah asked, lowering her camera. Catherine shook her head. "Let her go. We have units watching her house, and her lawyer's been notified of this incident. She's not going to get far." As Dave hooked up the Mercedes for its final journey to the impound lot, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, that the situation was finally reaching its end. But there was also a strange sadness in watching someone's life unravel so completely. Rachel joined us, her phone still recording. Well, that was intense, though I have to admit it'll make for one hell of a conclusion to the video series. "Video series?" I asked, surprised. She grinned. "Oh yeah, the whole saga's gone viral. Entitled Karen's Parking Lot Power Trip, has over 1 million views. Don't worry, I kept everyone's identities private." Officer Martinez finished writing his report, while Catherine made several more phone calls. The morning had taken on a surreal quality, as if we'd all been actors in some bizarre suburban theater production. "You know," Sarah mused, "in all of this, I don't think anyone ever asked Linda why she didn't just use the cafe's parking lot in the first place." "Sometimes," Catherine observed, "it's not about the parking. It's about power, control, the need to prove something. Linda Parker just picked the wrong driveway to make her stand." Dave gave a final wave as he drove away, Linda's Mercedes swaying slightly on the back of his truck. It was a fitting end to a story that had started with such a simple act of entitlement and spiraled into something none of us could have predicted. As the morning traffic began to pick up, life on Maple Street started returning to normal. But something had changed in our little corner of suburbia. We'd witnessed the fall of a would-be queen, brought down not by grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but by her own inability to admit she was wrong. The keys to Linda's Mercedes sat heavy in Officer Martinez's evidence bag, a small but potent symbol of how quickly power can slip away when it's built on nothing but ego and entitlement. The morning calm shattered with the screech of tires and blaring car horns. I rushed to my window to find Linda's white Mercedes blocking not just my driveway, but half the street. She had parked it diagonally, creating a makeshift barricade that forced traffic to squeeze by in single file. Today was different. Linda wasn't dressed in her usual designer workout wear or carrying her premium coffee. Instead, she wore what looked like yesterday's clothes, her hair uncombed, her movements erratic. She was placing orange traffic cones around her car, creating an absurd obstacle course in the middle of our suburban street. My phone exploded with messages. "Rachel, she's lost it completely. Already called Uncle Richard." Mark, "Need me to call the police?" Sarah, "Don't go outside. She looks dangerous." But it was Dave from the towing company who sent the most worrying text. "Just got a call from Mrs. Parker. She says if anyone tries to tow her car, she's got a surprise waiting. Be careful." Through my window, I watched Linda pace around her Mercedes, muttering to herself and occasionally shouting at passing cars that dared to honk their horns. She had turned my quiet residential street into a theater for her final meltdown. Officer Martinez arrived first, lights flashing but sirens silent. He parked at a safe distance and approached on foot, one hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Mrs. Parker," he called out, his voice firm but professional. "You need to move this vehicle immediately. You're creating a traffic hazard." Linda spun to face him, her eyes wild. "A hazard? No, officer, I'm creating a statement, a monument to injustice." She gestured dramatically at my house. "Everyone needs to see what happens when progress is strangled by small-minded people." More cars were backing up now, creating a chorus of honking horns. Linda seemed to feed off the chaos, her movements becoming more animated. "Look!" she shouted to the growing crowd of frustrated drivers. "Look what they've reduced me to. My husband's gone, my assets are frozen, my reputation is ruined, all because of a parking." "Space!" I noticed Catherine from the City Planning Commission arriving, accompanied by 2 police cruisers. They blocked off both ends of the street, effectively turning our neighborhood into a crisis zone. Rachel was live-streaming everything from the cafe window, while Sarah documented from her porch. The whole scene felt surreal, like watching a movie about suburban life gone horribly wrong. Linda had climbed onto the hood of her Mercedes now, her voice rising above the cacophony of car horns. You want to know what really happens in this perfect little neighborhood? Let me tell you about power and privilege and how quickly it all disappears when you dare to challenge the status quo. Officer Martinez spoke into his radio, calling for backup. Through my security camera feed, I could see Dave's tow truck waiting around the corner, along with what looked like a negotiator's vehicle. Mrs. Parker, Catherine attempted to reason with her, you're only making things worse for yourself. The restraining order, the legal issues, this isn't helping your case. Linda laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. My case. My case was dead the moment she decided her precious driveway was more important than progress. She pointed accusingly at my house. Do you know what we could have built here? What this neighborhood could have become? I watched as she reached into her car through the sunroof, pulling out what looked like blueprints. She began throwing them into the air, pages of unrealized development plans fluttering like broken dreams in the morning breeze. Look at these, she screamed, throwing more papers. Luxury apartments, high-end retail, a future worthy of Pine Grove. But no, we had to protect one woman's right to an empty driveway. The negotiator had arrived now, a calm-voiced woman named Susan who approached the scene with professional detachment. Linda, she called out, using her first name deliberately. Why don't we talk about what's really bothering you? Linda paused in her paper-throwing frenzy, fixing Susan with an intense stare. What's bothering me? You want to know what's bothering me? She reached into her car again, and everyone tensed. What she pulled out wasn't a weapon, but a framed photograph. This was taken last year, she said, her voice suddenly quiet. The Pine Grove Woman of the Year award. Look at me. Perfect. Hair, perfect smile, perfect life. And now I'm the neighborhood cautionary tale, the crazy lady who couldn't let go of a parking space. Her voice broke on the last words, and for a moment, the only sound was the rustling of scattered blueprints in the wind. It wasn't about the parking space, she continued, more to herself than her audience. It was about control, about showing everyone that I mattered, that I had power. But look at me now, staging a one-woman protest in the middle of a street, throwing away the last pieces of my dignity. Susan took another step closer. It's not too late to end this peacefully, Linda. Just step down from the car and we can talk about it. For a moment, it seemed like Linda might comply. She looked at the chaos she had created, the blocked traffic, the scattered papers, the gathering crowd of neighbors and officials. Then her expression hardened. No, she declared, reaching into her car one final time. If I'm going to be remembered as the neighborhood crazy lady, I might as well earn the title. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Linda emerged with a can of spray paint, and before anyone could stop her, she began writing on the side of her own Mercedes. Large, angry letters spelled out, "This is what progress looks like." Officer Martinez moved forward, but Linda wasn't finished. She jumped down from the hood and ran to my driveway, spray paint arcing through the air as she created a neon orange line across the concrete. There, she shouted, throwing the empty can aside. Now everyone can see exactly where. Progress dies in Pine Grove. The negotiator tried again. Linda, damaging property isn't going to solve anything. Let's talk about what you really want. What I want. Linda's laugh was hollow. I want my life back. I want my husband to return my calls. I want my friends to stop pretending they don't know me when they see me at the grocery store. But most of all, She turned to face my house directly. I want her to admit that this whole thing was ridiculous, that we could have worked something out if she hadn't been so stubborn. That was the moment I decided to step outside. Against the warnings of multiple text messages and the gestures of law enforcement, I walked onto my porch. "You're right, Linda," I said clearly, making everyone turn to look at me. "This whole thing was ridiculous, but not because I was stubborn, because you couldn't accept that sometimes no means no." She stared at me, spray paint dripping from her ruined Mercedes onto the asphalt. "Do you have any idea what I've lost?" "Yes," I replied simply. "I've watched you lose it piece by piece, all because you couldn't admit you were wrong. And now you're standing in the middle of the street, vandalizing your own car, trying to blame everyone else for choices you made." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the car horns had stopped, as if everyone was holding their breath to see what would happen next. Linda looked around slowly, really seeing the scene she had created for the first time. Her shoulders slumped, and suddenly she looked very, very tired. "I can't even afford the impound fees anymore," she said quietly. "This car, it's probably the last thing of value I have left. And look what I've done to it." Officer Martinez approached carefully. "Mrs. Parker, we need to end this now. Please step away from the vehicle." This time, she didn't resist. As the officers led her toward a waiting cruiser, she looked back at her Mercedes one last time. "I really did think I was helping," she said to no one in particular. "I really thought I could force everyone to see my vision." Dave's tow truck rumbled around the corner, ready for its final pickup. The negotiator was speaking quietly with Catherine, while officers began clearing the scattered blueprints from the street. Rachel ended her live stream, walking over to join me on my porch. "Well," she said, surveying the scene, "I guess that's one way to end a parking dispute." Sarah appeared with coffee for everyone, including the first responders. "Think she'll be okay?" she asked, watching Linda sitting quietly in the back of the police car. "Eventually," Catherine answered, joining us. "But she's facing some serious charges now. Vandalism, creating a public hazard, violating a restraining order. It's going to take time to sort everything out." As Dave hooked up the spray-painted Mercedes for its final journey to the impound lot, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The situation had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined when this all started. Officer Martinez approached with his notebook. "We'll need statements from everyone. And Ms. Thompson, you might want to consider getting that driveway cleaned professionally. Spray paint can be tricky to remove." Looking at the orange line Linda had painted, her final act of defiance, I realized it would serve as a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control when ego and entitlement go unchecked. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting harsh light on the chaos of scattered papers, traffic cones, and neon graffiti. As the tow truck pulled away with Linda's ruined Mercedes, it felt like the end of a strange and turbulent chapter in our neighborhood's history. 6 months passed, and Pine Grove settled into a new normal. The orange line on my driveway had faded to a pale ghost of itself, despite professional cleaning attempts. In an odd way, I decided to leave it there, a reminder of how something as simple as a parking dispute could spiral into suburban warfare. The cafe hummed with its usual morning activity, but Linda's corner table remained conspicuously empty. Rachel had turned it into a community bulletin board space, covered with local notices and upcoming events. Somehow, that felt like poetic justice. I was sipping my morning coffee on my porch when a familiar face appeared. Catherine from the City Planning Commission, tablet in hand as always. "Thought you might want to see this," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "The final report on the Parker development investigation just went public." The document she showed me was filled with technical language and legal jargon, but the essence was clear. Tom Parker's company had been involved in similar pressure tactics across 3 different neighborhoods. My driveway dispute had merely been the thread that unraveled their entire operation. What happened to Linda? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Catherine's expression softened. Community service, mandatory counseling, and a hefty fine for the street incident. She's living with her sister in another state. Now, actually sent a letter to the department last week. She pulled up an email on her tablet. Linda's words were surprisingly clear and reflective. I've had time to think about what happened in Pine Grove. At first, I blamed everyone else. The homeowner who wouldn't cooperate, the officials who blocked our plans, even my husband who left when things got difficult. But now I understand that I was the architect of my own downfall. It was never really about the parking space. It was about power, control, and my inability to accept that sometimes the answer is simply no. A new family had moved into the Parker's old house, a young couple with twins who actually walked to the cafe instead of driving. They'd introduced themselves with homemade cookies and zero pretension, a welcome change from their predecessors. Sarah Cooper joined us on the porch, carrying fresh scones from the cafe. Guess what Rachel just told me? The video series about the whole parking saga has become a case study in a local law school's course on property rights and community development. I laughed at the irony. So Linda's vision for the neighborhood did end up being educational, just not in the way she planned. Officer Martinez drove by, waving as he passed. He still patrolled our street regularly, though these days it was more out of friendly habit than necessity. The most excitement we'd had lately was a lost dog who'd decided my now famous driveway made a nice resting spot. You know, Catherine mused, in all my years working in city planning, I've never seen someone go to such lengths over a parking space. But in the end, it wasn't really about parking at all, was it? No, I agreed, watching the morning traffic flow peacefully past my house. It was about boundaries, not just the physical ones between properties, but the personal ones between right and wrong, between progress and preservation, between change and respect. Dave from the towing company had become something of a local celebrity after Rachel's videos went viral. He'd even started a blog about his most interesting towing experiences, though he was gentlemanly enough to keep names out of his stories. The cafe's actual parking lot was full now, a normal morning rush of people getting their coffee before work. Nobody tried to park in my driveway anymore. In fact, it had become something of a local legend. Rachel told me tourists sometimes drove by to see the driveway that launched 1,000 memes. The city council's using your case to revamp our development approval process, Catherine mentioned, scrolling through her tablet. New guidelines about community engagement, stricter penalties for harassment and intimidation tactics. They're calling it the Pine Grove Protocol. Sarah snorted. Linda would hate that her legacy is more regulation, not less. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of my maple tree, the one Linda had once declared an eyesore that needed to go in her development plans. Its branches swayed peacefully, unconcerned with human dramas about parking spaces and property lines. Sometimes, I reflected watching a young mother walk past with a stroller. The best way to improve a neighborhood isn't through grand developments or forced progress. Sometimes it's just about respecting what's already there, the boundaries, the history, the simple right of people to say no. Rachel emerged from the cafe, camera in hand. You guys need to see this. Someone made a musical remix of Linda's Final Meltdown. It's trending on TikTok. We gathered around her phone, laughing at the absurdity of it all. The orange line on my driveway caught the morning sun, a fading reminder of how quickly things can escalate when ego overrides reason. You ever regret standing your ground? Sarah asked, passing out the scones she'd brought. I thought about it, watching the peaceful ebb and flow of morning traffic, the neighbors walking their dogs, the kids heading to school. No, I said, finally. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting, even if they start with something as simple as a parking space. Catherine's tablet chimed with a new notification. Well, here's some irony for you. The city just approved a new public parking lot 2 blocks from here. Plenty of space for everyone. Progress, Sarah grinned, but with proper permits. This time. The morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light across my contested driveway. Life in Pine Grove had returned to its quiet routine, but something fundamental had changed. We'd all learned valuable lessons about standing up for what's right, about the true meaning of community, and about the importance of respecting boundaries, both physical and personal. As my neighbors went about their day, parking their cars in designated spots without drama or controversy, I couldn't help but smile at how something so simple had turned into something so significant. In the end, it wasn't just about protecting a parking space. It was about protecting the principle that sometimes the smallest acts of standing your ground can have the biggest impact. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.